The Whitmore estate was the kind of place people only saw in magazines. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, golden chandeliers hanging heavy from the ceiling, and a silence so deep you could almost hear your own heartbeat. Ethan had only been working there for 2 weeks, but he already felt the weight of the house pressing down on him. Every step echoed. Every door seemed to watch. What unsettled him most wasn't the luxury, though. It was the door at the end of the west hallway, always locked, always off limits. The staff whispered about it, but never dared to linger near. And Mr. Richard Whitmore, the 70-year-old head of the family, had given Ethan one warning on his first day. Don't ask about that room. Don't even think about it. One night, long after the household had gone to sleep, Ethan was walking through the hall to fetch a glass of water. That was when he noticed it, the faintest glow slipping through the crack beneath the locked door. His chest tightened. He froze, staring, almost forgetting to breathe. There shouldn't have been any light inside. Then came a sound, a low thud, as if something heavy had fallen. Ethan's hand trembled on the railing. He glanced around, but the hallway was empty, the silence even louder now. His heart pounded in his ears as he leaned closer to the door, eyes fixed on that sliver of light. And just when he thought it was his imagination, he swore he saw a shadow pass across the crack, slow and deliberate. The next morning, Ethan tried to push away the image of that faint glow beneath the locked door, but it followed him like a shadow. At breakfast, the Whitmore family gathered around the long dining table. Silverware clinked against fine china, but the air was stiff, thick with unspoken tension. Mr. Whitmore sat at the head as always, tall even in age, his silver hair brushed neatly back. His piercing blue eyes scanned the table, pausing on Ethan longer than anyone else. It wasn't the look of suspicion. It was something else, something Ethan couldn't quite place, as though the old man was searching for a familiar face in him. Without warning, Mr. Whitmore pulled a small ring of keys from his pocket and slid them across the polished wood. "My study needs sorting," he said flatly. "You'll handle it." The chatter at the table fell silent. Ethan could feel the stares digging into him, resentful, questioning, even hostile. He wasn't family, he was barely even staff. Why would the old man trust him with something so private? One of the grandchildren finally muttered under their breath, just loud enough for Ethan to catch. "Strange how he trusts you. None of us ever get that chance." Ethan tucked the keys into his pocket, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe it was just because he worked hard, kept his head down. But the way Mr. Whitmore had looked at him, like he recognised something in Ethan that no one else could see, gnawed at him all day. And when he passed the west hallway later, his steps slowed in front of the locked door. The keys pressed against his leg, heavy, like they were daring him to try. Later that week, Ethan was shelving books in the library when someone's reflection appeared in the glass pane beside him. He turned and found Daniel, one of Mr. Whitmore's grandsons, leaning casually against the doorway. Daniel was about Ethan's age, but carried himself with the smugness of someone who had never wanted for anything. "You've been here, 2 weeks?" Daniel said, his voice low, sharp. "Funny how my grandfather already trusts you more than his own blood." Ethan stayed quiet, sliding another book into place, but Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "I saw you with the keys. Don't bother denying it. You've got access to things even we don't. So here's my question, what's he hiding in there?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel smirked, though his eyes stayed hard. "Don't play dumb. That locked room at the end of the hall. No one goes in, no one talks about it, but you're different. If you ever decide to open it, let me know. I'd like to see what makes you so special." He left just as quickly as he appeared, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Ethan stood frozen, the words circling in his head. "If you ever decide to open it." That night, as Ethan lay awake in the small guest room the staff used, he turned the ring of keys over and over in his hand. He thought about the glow beneath the door, the muffled thud, the whispers of resentment. None of it made sense, yet it all pointed to one truth. Mr. Whitmore was guarding something he didn't want anyone to know, and now, whether he liked it or not, Ethan was caught in the middle. It was late on a Saturday evening when the opportunity came. The Whitmore family had gone out for a charity gala, leaving the mansion quieter than Ethan had ever heard it. The hallways were dim, the only sound the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Ethan walked slowly toward the west wing, his footsteps echoing against the marble. The ring of keys weighed heavy in his pocket, each step louder in his ears than the last. He told himself he was only checking, only making sure nothing was out of place. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. When he reached the door, his breath caught. The polished wood loomed taller than he remembered, its brass handle gleaming faintly under the light. His hands shook as he fit the key into the lock. For a moment he hesitated, hearing Mr. Whitmore's warning in his head. Don't ask, don't think about it. The lock gave way with a soft click. Ethan pushed the door open, and the smell of old paper and leather drifted out. The room wasn't dark like he imagined. It was lit by a single lamp on a massive oak desk. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with files and folders, all neatly labelled, decades of records kept in order. But what caught his eye was the steel cabinet in the corner. Unlike the shelves, this cabinet had its own lock, and taped across it was a faded note with nothing but one word, private. Ethan's pulse quickened. He stepped closer, running his fingers across the cold metal. He slipped the key into the lock, and just as he was about to turn it, a floorboard creaked. Ethan spun around, his heart hammering. A shadow slid across the doorway, lingering for a moment before disappearing into the hall. He wasn't alone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The shadow outside the door was gone, but the echo of that creaking floorboard still rang in his ears. He stood frozen, every muscle tense, waiting for the sound of footsteps returning. Nothing, only silence. Slowly he pulled the key out of the steel cabinet's lock, slipping it back into his pocket. His instincts screamed at him, leave now before it's too late. He shut off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and eased the door shut behind him. As he stepped into the hallway, his eyes darted left and right. The corridor stretched empty, the light from the chandelier above casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He started walking back toward the staff wing, forcing his pace to stay calm. But every few steps, he thought he heard something behind him. A whisper of movement. Halfway down the hall, a voice cut through the silence. "What were you doing in there?" Ethan's stomach dropped. He turned slowly to see Clara, one of the older housekeepers, standing near the corner. Her sharp eyes flicked to his pocket, where the keys bulged against the fabric. I was just checking the lights," Ethan stammered, his voice barely steady. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to keep an eye on things while he was out." Clara didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, long and hard, as though weighing whether to believe him. Finally, she shook her head and whispered, "Be careful, Ethan. Around here, curiosity doesn't end well." Before he could ask what she meant, she walked away, her footsteps fading into the stillness. Ethan stood frozen, heart pounding, until the sound was gone. Then, almost without realising it, his hand slipped into his pocket and brushed against something he hadn't noticed before. The photograph, the one that must have fallen from the file he'd touched. He pulled it out under the dim light. A child's face, blurred by time, stared back at him, and in the bottom corner, barely visible, was the name of the orphanage where Ethan himself had grown up. The photograph burned in Ethan's pocket the next morning. He could barely focus as he carried out his usual tasks, sorting mail, arranging files in the study, checking the schedule. Every time his hand brushed against the folded picture, he felt the same chill. The child in that photograph wasn't just anyone. The name of his own orphanage was printed faintly on the back. By late afternoon, Mr. Whitmore returned from his business meeting. The old man walked through the front doors with the calm authority that always silenced the house. His sharp blue eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Ethan before moving on. Ethan's chest tightened. Did he already know? That evening, as Ethan prepared the study for the night, the silence was broken by the sound of a cane tapping lightly on the marble floor. He turned and froze. Mr. Whitmore was standing in the doorway, his gaze fixed on Ethan's hands. "What are you hiding?" the old man asked, his voice low but cutting. Ethan's mouth went dry. He shoved the photograph deeper into his pocket, fumbling for words. "Nothing, sir. Just organising the desk." Mr. Whitmore stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me." His hand extended, palm open. "Give it here." For a moment, Ethan thought about denying it, about pretending he had no idea what Mr. Whitmore meant. But his legs felt heavy, his pulse too loud in his ears. Slowly, almost against his will, he pulled the photograph from his pocket and placed it in the old man's hand. Mr. Whitmore looked at the picture without flinching, his face unreadable. Then his eyes lifted to Ethan's, sharp and unyielding. "So you've seen it," he said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. Why would a picture from my orphanage be in your private files?" For the first time since Ethan had met him, Mr. Whitmore's expression shifted. It wasn't anger, it wasn't suspicion, it was something far heavier, grief. Mr. Whitmore held the photograph in his hand for a long time, the silence so heavy Ethan could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. The old man's fingers trembled slightly as he traced the edge of the faded picture. "When I told you not to ask questions," he said at last, his voice lower than Ethan had ever heard it, "it wasn't because I didn't trust you, it was because I knew the answers would change everything." Ethan's heart pounded. "Change what?" he asked. "Why is this from the orphanage where I grew up?" Mr. Whitmore looked up, and for the first time his eyes didn't carry the usual cold sharpness. They were softer now, clouded with something Ethan couldn't quite name. "Because that child in the photo was never meant to be forgotten." Ethan stepped closer, his voice breaking. "What are you saying? That this has something to do with me?" The old man placed the picture on the desk, his hand resting on top of it. "I kept records of many things, business deals, investments, properties. But this file," he tapped the folder beside the photo, "this was different. This wasn't about money. It was about a choice I made, one that I thought would protect someone. And maybe it did, but it also left scars that never healed." Ethan's chest tightened as the words sank in. He remembered the years in the orphanage, the way he always wondered why no one had ever come back for him. Mr. Whitmore drew a slow breath. "You want the truth? Then read it for yourself." He slid the thick folder across the desk toward Ethan. Ethan stared at it, his hand hovering just above the cover. He could feel the weight of decades pressing down, the kind of truth that could tear open every wound he had tried to bury. Finally, with shaking fingers, he opened the folder. The folder was heavier than it looked. Ethan flipped through the pages, each one crinkling softly under his trembling fingers. At first it was dry legal paperwork, property ledgers, tax filings. But buried in the middle was something different. Record stamped adoption. His eyes darted across the lines, dates, signatures, case numbers. And then his orphanage, the very place he had grown up, typed in black ink as plain as day. Ethan's chest tightened, his breath catching in his throat. The more he read, the more undeniable it became. These weren't just papers, they were his papers. Ethan looked up, voice unsteady. "This is me, isn't it? Why would you keep this hidden?" Mr. Whitmore's jaw tightened. For a moment he didn't speak, only stared at the photograph still lying on the desk. Then slowly he said, "Because when you were born, there were people who would have used you to hurt me, enemies who would have seen you as leverage, nothing more. I thought if I kept you here, you would never have had a life of your own. And if I claimed you, they would have destroyed you to get to me." The words landed heavy, colder than Ethan was ready for. His mind spun with images of faceless threats, of a childhood stolen not just by neglect, but by someone else's decision to let him go. "You thought leaving me alone in that place was safer?" Ethan's voice cracked, anger and grief tangled together. "Do you have any idea what it's like to wait for someone who never comes?" The old man's face tightened, a flicker of pain breaking through his usual control. "Every day I asked myself if I'd done the right thing, and every day I regretted it." Before Ethan could respond, the door creaked open. Two relatives stood in the doorway, their eyes wide with shock. They had heard enough to piece together what was happening. "What is this?" one of them demanded, their voice rising. "Why is he in those papers?" Ethan froze, clutching the folder tighter. For the first time, the secret wasn't just between him and Mr. Whitmore. Now the entire house was about to know. The room filled with voices before Ethan could even form a question. The two relatives who had overheard stormed inside, their words sharp and bitter. "So it's true," one of them spat. "All these years you kept us out, and for what? For him?" Another pointed at Ethan as though he were a stranger who had broken into their home. "He's nobody. He doesn't belong in this family." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but his throat felt locked. His entire life he had wondered why no one had claimed him, why every other child at the orphanage had some story of family except him. And now, standing here, accused of being an outsider in a house that had already marked him as one, the silence felt heavier than their words. Mr. Whitmore rose slowly from his chair. His cane tapped against the marble as he stood between Ethan and the rest of the family. His voice, though calm, carried enough weight to still the room. "Enough," he said. "You've all fought over this house, over money, over my name, but not one of you has asked why I made the choices I did. Not one of you has tried to understand." One of the grandchildren sneered. "Understand what? That you're throwing away everything for him?" Mr. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "No, that I once made a mistake. I let go of something I should have held on to, and I won't make that mistake again." The words struck Ethan harder than the shouts had. He looked at the old man, his heart twisting. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a worker in someone else's house. He was a piece of a story that had been hidden from him all along. But the room wasn't convinced. Whispers spread like sparks through dry grass. Doubt, anger, fear of what this revelation meant for them. And then Mr. Whitmore turned to Ethan, his gaze steady. "The question now isn't about them," he said. "It's about you. Do you want to know the full truth, even if it means giving up the life you thought you had?" Ethan swallowed hard, his hands trembling against the folder still in his grip. He had wanted answers his whole life. But was he ready for them now? The study was silent except for the faint rustle of the folder in Ethan's hands. He could feel the eyes of the entire family pressing down on him. Suspicion, anger, disbelief. His throat was dry, but his voice finally broke through. "All my life," he said quietly, "I wondered why no one came for me, why I was the kid left behind, and now, it's you." His eyes locked with Mr. Whitmore's. "I need the truth, even if it changes everything." Mr. Whitmore straightened, leaning on his cane, the weight of age clear in his posture, but not in his voice. He reached inside his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope, its edges worn and yellowed with time. He set it firmly on the desk. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is my final will, and it isn't what any of you expect." Gasps rippled across the room. Some family members leaned forward, hungry, others stiffened with dread. Ethan held his breath. "I've built fortunes," Mr. Whitmore continued. "Houses, companies, all the things you've fought over for years, and you can keep fighting if you wish, but that's not what matters. What matters is in here." He tapped the envelope. His gaze moved to Ethan. "This is for him." A wave of protest erupted, but he raised a hand, silencing the room. "This envelope does not give Ethan my fortune," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "It gives him something far more valuable. It gives him my name, my recognition, and the responsibility of protecting the truth of this family." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. The faces around the room fell, shock, confusion, anger. Ethan felt his chest tighten, his heart pounding as he realised the weight of what was being given. It wasn't money, it wasn't property, it was belonging and the burden that came with it. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I don't care about the money, I just wanted to belong, to someone." Mr. Whitmore's weathered hand rested on his shoulder. His eyes, for once, softened completely. "And now you do. Not because of what I give you, but because of who you are." The room fell into silence. For the first time in years, no one argued. No one shouted. The truth had reshaped everything. Lesson. Sometimes the truth we fear the most is the one that sets us free. Money fades, power shifts, but belonging and honesty remain. What defines family isn't the fortune left behind, but the courage to stand by each other when the truth finally comes to light. Question: if you were in Ethan's place, would you have opened that door to uncover the truth, or would you have chosen silence to stay safe? Thank you for staying with us until the end. We'll see you again in the next story, right here on Rain Inside.